Hello and welcome to Sri Lanka at 99.9 for Cricket Every Day. My name's Mark Machado from the Merrily End, and I'm joined as always by my esteemed co-host Estelle Devon from the Papare. Sri Lanka at 99.94 is your new home for Sri Lanka content, and we'll be dropping into your podcast feed and on YouTube and on the 99.94 app 3 times every week. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. And of course, if you're listening, please do leave us a review, rate, subscribe, and tell all your friends about us. Today, we are talking about Dilshan Madushanka, who burst onto the scene at the Asia Cup. He got some big wickets and did go for some runs as well. We'll talk about that as well. And this week, a few days ago, he got picked up by the Durban Super Giants in the South Africa T20 franchise league that starts early next year. So there's a lot going on with Dilshan, and we're hoping to kind of take a bit of a look into his backstory and get some ideas about where he's coming from and where he might head to in the future. Estelle, when did you first come across Dilshan Madushanka? When did you first hear that name being bandied about?
I think the first time a lot of Sri Lankan cricket fans heard about him was during that build up to the Under 19 World Cup. Of course, at that point, I think coaches knew there was something special about this guy because he'd also been picked for the emerging side and to South Africa, where the Under 19 World Cup was supposed to take place. And then once he got there, I believe he had a pretty good tournament, surprised a few with his pace. Particularly in those conditions, he was really effective. It wasn't a good tournament for Sri Lanka as far as I remember, but Madushanka definitely caught everybody's eye during that period.
Yeah, I think Sri Lanka ended up battling out for kind of, I think, was it sixth or seventh place against Nigeria in the end. They're the group that they struggled in against India, and a group with India, New Zealand, and Japan. Obviously, they beat Japan quite convincingly, but they struggled against India and New Zealand. We're talking about 2019 now, so this is obviously just before the pandemic, and maybe the structures that were in place around Sri Lankan cricket weren't the best and weren't at optimum. Dilshan Madushanka, though, he's had quite an interesting trajectory into cricket because I believe he didn't play much leather ball cricket in his late teens, and was mainly playing softball cricket till he got selected for the under-19s, right?
Yeah, at the papare.com, one of my colleagues, Sharmigan Sridharan, did an article about him in 2019 where he detailed how he kind of caught the eye of national selectors and managed to get into the under 19 setup. So basically, Madushanka comes from a very rural area of Sri Lanka, Hungama, in Hambantota, which is off Hambantota as well. So quite a kind of very much in the outskirts of the township. And the school he went to obviously didn't have the kind of resources to really support someone on that trajectory towards becoming, national cricketer. So from what I've heard, he played at under 15 level leather ball cricket, and then from there it was a bit difficult for him to continue with, obviously cricket's not a cheap sport to play. You've got, even if you're a bowler, you've got to buy the boots, equipment necessary, get the right nutrition, all of that. So he wasn't involved in leather ball cricket for a bit of a, a, a period of time during his late teens. But fortunately, he did keep in touch with the district coach, who was Manjula Karunaratna, Hambantota district. And that coach Madushanka credits him a lot for, where he is right now, because Karunaratna used to tell him when there were, divisional selections or any good games. So I think he got an opportunity through Manjula Karunaratna to be a net bowler during the Sri Lanka versus India under 19 series, which I think they had a couple of games in Surya and that's kind of where his life completely changed around, because guess who was watching? None other than Sri Lanka's most successful left-arm bowler, Chaminda Vaas. So kind of a fairy tale kind of story since 2019 for him.
Yeah, and of course, Chaminda Vaas is another fast bowler from down south, well, at least south of Colombo, anyway. And there's a bit of a history of Sri Lanka having unorthodox bowlers from that part of the world, right? With obviously Malinga and I think Nuran Kulasekara as well came from well, definitely not maybe as far south as Dilshan Madushanka comes from, but that neck of the woods, and given and creating a pathway almost for players who come from a slightly unorthodox background, because we talk a lot about Sri Lanka, about schoolboy cricket in Sri Lanka, and coming from a school that isn't a big Colombo school or isn't a big school in one of the more urban areas really puts you at a massive disadvantage, right? Because regardless of you know whatever financial background you come from, if you can get yourself to one of the even the medium-sized schools in a more urban area, they will have equipment and they will be able to get you playing the sport and potentially reaching your full potential, right?
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about Madhushankar's journey as well, because in the last 5 to 10 years, the scouting from the schools in Colombo, some of the bigger schools that invest heavily in cricket, has been really good and far reaching. So you see a lot of these guys from the rural areas of Sri Lanka coming into Colombo and playing for those schools. But Madhushankar was not picked up in that manner. So they, as far as I know, the school he attended didn't have under 19 side. So all his cricket at that level was played at district or as a net bowler, or coming straight into kind of the Sri Lanka development kind of pathway. So that's another interesting thing, because like you said, the if you're anywhere in a slightly urbanized area, there is a lot more resources in comparison to something like what Madhushankar would have grown up having. So that's kind of, again, in Sri Lanka, a lot of these kids who come from areas like that, it's a lot of luck as well, right? It's a lot of what we can say is kind of fate, because you don't have a proper pathway that this is how you're going to get into the Sri Lanka under 19 squad when you come from areas like that. So with Madhushankar, he was bowling in the nets, like I said, during that under 19 series between Sri Lanka and India. Chaminda spots him, gets his phone number. He gets a call a couple of days later telling him, "Come to Colombo. We want to see you at training." So, I mean, it makes you think also about how many really fall through the cracks. But of course, I think that's a whole different conversation we can have.
Yeah, and we will have that conversation. And the other, topic we should bring up at some point is we need to talk about Richmond College as well, and what they've done, because they're probably, they're a school from down south, and I think that they've probably there's a team photo that goes around online occasionally, and I think there's 5 players in it from maybe 2018 2019 batch, maybe, or no, maybe slightly before that, who've played international cricket, which is an incredible stat for any school in any part of the world. So I'm sure at some point we'll get round to that, and we'll talk about why cricket, or how Sri Lankan cricket can do more to try and nurture talent in parts of the country that don't necessarily traditionally produce too many players. You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have a show for you on podcast, YouTube, and on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, and the West Indies. Of course, you're listening to Sri Lanka as well, right here. If you want to find us, the best way to follow us is on social media at 9994DM, or by downloading the 99.94 app, or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket. And please, if you are listening, as I said before, and I've said in previous episodes, leave us a review. There's this rivalry going on with other pods, and I think, actually, I'll be honest, Estelle, I don't think anyone's left us a review yet, which is slightly embarrassing. But we all know what us Sri Lankans are like. We turn up to a party late, but we always make sure the party's about us when we get there. So Dilshan Madushanka, he makes a bit of a name for. He gets into the under 19 setup, makes a bit of a name for himself, ends up on in the development squad. Then kind of COVID hits, which means, like almost all Sri Lankan players, he isn't able to play cricket for at least for about 9 months. I think most of them have said they weren't able to play outside their back gardens, kind of thing. What happens to him after that? What is his trajectory, and how important is the Lanka Premier League, a league I'm going to consider as the premier T20 league in the world, to his development?
Yeah, I think more than the Lanka Premier League, he had a lot of success in these A team tours. I believe he had uh, got a few wickets against Pakistan. Like you said, COVID had COVID hit at a really tough, like a time where he was really, getting those eyeballs. I remember mentioning before as well, Mickey Arthur was someone who had his eye on Madushanka, but unfortunately at that time, Madushanka was suffering from an injury. Um, so through that time, despite not having too many games, he was kind of there and thereabouts. As finding a left arm in Sri Lanka is kind of tough. You've got the handful, Vishwa Fernando, Binura Fernando, and then you've got Dilshan Madushanka. So he was always kind of, I think, in the selectors or the coach's eye line, because not only is he a left armer, but in comparison to the two Fernandos, he bowls relatively quick and he can swing the ball. So kind of reminiscent of Chaminda was of course later in his career not the quickest, but the swing was something that really I think caught everyone's eye. And think the catalyst for him was that invitational tournament which Sri Lanka cricket organized just before the Asia Cup, basically as a bit of a selection kind of uh, tournament for the championship, particularly because Sri Lanka's three premier fast bowlers were injured. So no Dushmantha Chamira, no Binura Fernando, no Lahiru Kumara. So that opened the doors for someone like Dilshan Madushanka. He didn't get too many wickets. I think uh, it was a very short tournament. So he played 4 games, 3 wickets. But the way he bowled and the way he was able to swing the ball, I think everybody followed Sri Lanka cricket in the last year or so would have seen that clip of Dhananjay De Silva, giving somebody else in the team a bit of a look and pointing at Dilshan Madushanka, so as to say, kind of, this guy's got something special. So I think that was the moment, or that was the turning point in his career. Of course, from their Asia Cup, and now he's on the way to Australia in a month as well. Just him being a left arm quick already had everybody's attention, because we don't get that many left arm quicks in Sri Lanka. So apart from Vishwa Fernando, Binura Fernando, then you have Dilshan Madushanka. But when you compare him to the two of them, he's much quicker and offers something much different uh, to the pair of them. And of course, Vishwa is seen more of a test specialist. So I think he was in the kind of radar of coaching staff and selectors over the last 2 or 3 years. I remember mentioning in a previous episode as well that Mickey Arthur had his eye on him during the latter part of his tenure as well. So he's kind of been there and thereabouts, but I think the catalyst, or like the turning point, really came for him in that invitational tournament that Sri Lanka cricket organized just before the Asia Cup. So at that point, I think more or less the batting lineup was in place. There were just a couple of spots remaining, but when it came to the fast bowlers, there were a lot of positions that Sri Lanka needed to fill with the three premier guys out with injury. So without Dushmantha Chamira, Binura Fernando, and Lahiru Kumara available for selection, they needed to fill those gaps. And we spoke about fate before as well, right? But Madhushanka didn't get too many wickets in that tournament. They played 4 games. It was a very short tournament. 4 games, he got 3 wickets, but just the manner in which he bowled, the way he was able to get the ball to move at pace, I think he impressed everybody. Uh, there was a clip going around of Dhananjay De Silva, actually, who was in the same team as Madhushanka, giving a kind of a look to another player in the team, pointing at Madhushanka, kind of to say that this guy's got something about him. He's difficult to play in these conditions. So that was kind of the opportunity that he needed, and he really grabbed it with both hands, I think. And then From there, of course, Asia Cup, and we all know what happened there. Just, fairy tale stuff once again. The type of wickets he got. If you look at it, six wickets I think he got in that tournament, including Zazai of Afghanistan, Virat Kohli, Deepak Huda, Rishabh Pant. Um, got wickets in critical situations. He bowled in the death. He bowled with the new ball. So yeah, that tournament I think was kind of what sparked or what turned things in his favor.
Can we talk about that Virat Kohli wicket and that India game, right? Because up till that moment, I'm thinking like, here's a young bowler. He's pretty raw. It felt to me he was filling a spot, holding down 4 overs while some of our better bowlers were in recovery, in rehabilitation for injuries. And I was like, he's good, but he looks a bit raw and he's got some work to do. And then he gets that Virat Kohli wicket. And, I don't want to say more, that I'm a very egalitarian person, Estelle. I believe all wickets are equal, right? But actually,
they aren't.
When the minute that ball clips that wicket and the stumps fall over, you're like, wow. Firstly, what a ball. Secondly, that was Virat Kohli. Like, if you're going to play for Sri Lanka, I just require one. I almost don't care how talented you are. I think you need to be fearless, and to bowl like that to Virat in your third game of international cricket just shows what kind of stuff this kid is made out of, right? And that's the moment where I'm like, all right, maybe we've got something on our hands here. And I get it, right? I understand where that comes from, because there is you can do as well as you'd want in invitational T20 quadrangle tournaments that SLC put together, but actually to step up and do it on an international stage against the biggest team in the world, against their best player, possibly of all time, definitely in that format. Okay, all right, maybe people are saying he's out of form and whatever, but still, what a moment for the young chap, right? When you consider he spent most of his late teens having to avoid playing hardball cricket because he couldn't afford to do it. His family couldn't afford to support him. He had to, his father didn't want him playing cricket because he thought he had to focus on his academics. And then in only a few short years' time, as I said, his third ever game to get that wicket, just incredible, isn't it? It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think, and I saw a program that, of course, the Sri Lankan cricketers are very busy with lots of kind of invitations to TV shows and stuff like that. So one of them, him talking about Pathum Nissanka actually before the game, asking him what he would have done, what he would do if he took Virat Kohli's wicket. So that question itself tells me, right, that that's how much they value Kohli's wicket. And like you said, you can talk about form or, where Kohli is in his career, but to any youngster, you think you dream, even if you aren't playing, you dream, that's your dream, right? You shatter the stumps of one of the greatest to play the game. And he was able to live that dream. And he had answered Nissanka saying, I wouldn't know what to do. I just run around the grounds. And that's exactly what he did. So, it's amazing, like you mentioned about his dad not wanting him to play cricket, because I think when you come from a background like that where you don't have sometimes even the bare necessities, you have, as parents, you have to be realistic as well, right? Not everybody goes on to make a career out of cricket. So, you know, just wanting his kid to focus on his studies or, go in that path is reasonable. But you think of how many Sri Lankan players Sri Lanka has probably lost in that manner. And we're fortunate enough that that didn't happen to Dilshan Madushanka, because, like you said, he looked really raw. He looked maybe like he was maybe a year or two away from, being ready for international cricket. But the way he bowled in that India game, which I think before the game, I was talking to a couple of colleagues about it as well, about, this could be a make or break game for him, because the Indian batting lineup, the power it packed, you're coming up against the likes of Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli. KL Rahul. So you know that they could really destroy a young bowler like Madhushanka. But to see how he came up against that challenge, and I think that was what was most impressive, like you said, about being fearless, about that attitude that he brought into the game. He didn't at any point, we know that he obviously thought Kohli's wicket was a big one, but you couldn't see that when he was bowling to him, when he was running up to bowl, he looked like he was bowling to any other batsman around the world. So that's that attitude that you love to see from a young player.
Yeah, unbelievable. Can we talk about the final though, right? Because Sri Lanka, what the finals, it's the kind of opposite story, right? So now going into the final, people are expecting quite big things from him. People are expecting that he's going to be one of the stars of the show if Sri Lanka win it, and it starts in the worst possible way. He gives away a no ball, which means there's a free hit, and then he ends up bowling. Was it 4 or 5 wides off the back of that? So before he's even bowled the first legal delivery, he's given away 10 runs, which is a difficult situation considering he's bowling the first over when Sri Lanka go into bowl, which is the second innings of the game. Luckily, Sri Lanka had a huge total on the board, so it wasn't a total disaster. But giving away 10 runs, and if you watch the final, you won't forget that image of him having to walk back up to go and bowl after he's bowled, I think, about 3 or 4 wides, with Dilshan Madushanka and Kusal Mendis talking to him and coached him. And that's this moment when you look at him and he's gone from this established cricketer who's getting Virat Kohli out to suddenly looking like the child, not the child, the youngster that he is, and the raw talent that he is. But the most amazing thing is that everyone has bad moments. Sometimes you're unfortunate, and your bad sporting moments are are televised across the globe to a huge global audience. I mean, I'll be honest, Estelle. I'd be lucky to get 6 balls down a track that were all legal, and if it does happen, I'm relying on an umpire being very lenient with me, right? So just being able to bowl 6 balls at the pace that they do is unbelievable. The fact that he was able to come back, bowl 5 balls legally after that, and then actually, the rest of his spell, he only ended up bowling 3 overs in that game, but the rest of his spell went for very few runs. If you take away those 10 runs off that first ball, the rest of the 2.5 after that, I think actually only went for 14 runs. That's actually an incredible comeback, isn't it?
Yeah, and that again comes back to the attitude and kind of the mentality he brings to the game, isn't it? So we did see it throughout the tournament, even when the more experienced bowlers like Asita Fernando. I know Asita has played as many T20 games as Madhushanka, but Fernando has been around the Sri Lankan setup for a long time, has played Test cricket, has kind of been in these kind of situations before. But Madhushanka, he's just basically a baby in international cricket. To kind of have that level-headedness and that maturity to come back and bowl in the way he did during the rest of his spell really, makes you, it gives you hope, right? And I know hope is what kills you in the end, but it gives you hope about what type of bowler he's going to be for Sri Lanka in the future.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation. Estelle, let's talk about what the future may hold for Dilshan. He's got a contract for the Durban Supergiants. This will be their first season because obviously the league started for the first time. It's also the first time that the Lucknow Supergiants organisation, which only started about this time last year, will be having a team playing in a different league. it was only him and Crystal Mendes in the end that ended up being sold or ended up getting bought from Sri Lanka in that South African franchise auction. We know that there's a tournament that be going on almost in parallel in the UAE, and there's Sri Lankan players involved in that tournament. And we know that Tikshana will be playing for the Super Kings franchise out in, I can't remember where exactly in South Africa that's based, but he'll be playing in that tournament as well. How significant do you think it is that essentially off the back of that Asia Cup performance, he's been picked up in a franchise league? And how transformative do you think that the money he'll earn from that could be for his career?
Yeah, I think it's massive for him and massively deserved because, like we spoke about, these franchises have the power to change people's lives, not only his life but his entire family's life, right? He comes from a very, very poor background. I believe his dad is a fisherman, mom works from home, so or is a housewife. So this kind of money and this kind of success is not something they would have seen or ever even, I think, dreamt about um, before the Asia Cup, right? Because you just it's so far away a dream that you don't even think about it. So this is going to be massive for him in that sense, but also I think uh, in terms of developing skills, I think he'll be really big for him going to a country like South Africa, where he will have obviously access to a lot of resources, a lot of experienced players bowling in different conditions. So I think it's going to be a massive learning curve. I really hope that Sri Lanka cricket and whatever franchises he does end up playing for really kind of manage him well, because you don't want a guy like that being overworked at 22 and his career ending at 25, 26, right? Because he's already had a bit of trouble with injury a couple of years ago, so you want to keep him fit, you want to keep him in optimal condition so that he can continue to do well on the international scene, whether it is for Sri Lanka or whether it is for the different franchises around the world for at least another, say, 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the transformative, not brought up. We're talking about how impactful the money could earn from franchise cricket could be, because the narrative very much in England is franchise cricket is destroying the game, it's not great. But actually, from a Sri Lankan perspective, franchise cricket creates a lot more opportunities for Sri Lankan players, firstly, to go abroad and learn about other cricket and cultures and work with different coaches, possibly more experienced coaches, and get to refine their games, but also the opportunity to earn money in other places. And we know that there's more franchise tournaments in the offering. We know at some stage Major League Cricket will arrive in the USA. That there's talks about massive reform to the 100 potentially, and IPL owners coming into the 100. And actually, as a Sri Lanka fan, I think it's something that we should be excited about, because not only will we see our best players playing all around the world, but I think that the potential finances that come back to the game in Sri Lanka and back onto the island, it could be massively transformative and could be very exciting for the future of the game in Sri Lanka. And of course, I imagine at some point a load of the best players in the world will end up trying to want to play in the Lanka Premier League as well. Thanks for listening to Sri Lanka 99.9 for Cricket Every Day. Please rate, review and subscribe. Download the 99.4 app and follow us personally. You can follow me at Mark Machado and Estelle at Estelle_Vasu Day 1 on Twitter. We'll put links for everything we do there on this podcast and beyond. Also follow our network at 99.94 on social media. Follow for podcast and commentary from the bat and ball world. Thanks for joining Cricket Conversation on 99.9 We Speak Cricket.